Vampires. Spooky little creatures, sometimes cute, sometimes creepy, lay in a coffin when they feel rather reepy. Everywhere you look, there's vampires. Movies, TV shows, games, books, the CEO of Colonel, the World Economic Forum, and anime. There's a lot of vampires in anime, and by extension, quite a few anime specifically about vampires. Some of these anime are pretty well known, like Hellsing and Vampire Hunter D, but we're not going to be talking about those ones today. I'd rather focus on a series that used to be kind of a big deal, but slowly faded into obscurity. That's right, today we're going to be talking about the Blood franchise. Mostly the 3 different anime, but I'll bring up some other stuff too. Yeah, this one's gonna be a long one. Also, I will be spoiling all of these series, so here's your heads up. If you just want to know if this franchise is worth checking out, then, well, yeah, that's why the video's so long. It doesn't mean I don't have my problems with it, it just means, look, we'll get there when we get there, alright? Intro over. Released in the year of our Lord 2000, Blood the Last Vampire is the result of Production IG's president wanting a new project that could be the next Ghost in the Shell, except this time it'd be an original concept rather than an adaptation of an already existing work. Mamoru Oshii, who of course directed the previously mentioned classic, was asked to do some brainstorming. At this point in his career, Oshii had already established himself as an anime director no one was going to forget. In his downtime between the various projects he worked on, he gave lectures and held little workshops for rookie animators, sort of as a way to give back to the community and lend his hand to fostering a new generation of greats, which is why he passed on IG's request to several of his students. And this is what they came up with. High School Girl, Katana. Then they threw in an American base and a title pulled straight from the ethereal plane where all stories reside. The position of director went to Hiroyuki Kitakubo, which is a very odd choice considering this was supposed to be a horror project, and Kitakubo's most famous work is a little OVA series called Golden Boy. It's not exactly a horror anime, it's an ecchi comedy, although the way the MC gets turned on by a used warm toilet seat has scarred me deeper than any horror anime I've ever seen, or probably ever will see.
My queen! I love you! Oh, my queen! Oh, you're so naughty! I got my queen, I got her!
Sorry you had to see that.
Anyways, he had just seen Seven, very good film by the way, and decided he wanted to try his hand at horror. Also, he had read Dracula and watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer shortly before starting work, which may or may not have influenced the final product. Additionally, the thing would be all digital, taking full advantage of the latest technological innovations in the animation world. I mean, I say that, but Japan was kind of late to the game in this stuff, but God bless them for it. Not content with just being the first digitally created film in Japan, Production IG decided to do another thing that had never been done before. They made an anime film that's almost entirely in English.
This isn't a very fun way to spend Halloween, now is it?
Another one of those fake corpses was found around here last night, and it's the same pattern.
There were 2 reasons for this. On the production side, IG felt like such a move would help them out in the international market, and they were right on the money with that. Over 100,000 copies sold within the first week of release alone, and in that same month, it became Manga Entertainment's top-selling title of all time. And mind you, this is just North America. Back in Japan, people ate it up too. Lots of awards and sequels getting greenlit that we will get to in due time. But besides marketability, the other reason most of the film is in English is because most of the characters are Americans or working with Americans. I mean, the setting is an American military base in Japan set in the 1960s. The only time you hear Japanese is when 2 Japanese characters talk to each other.
Young lady? Yada. あなた日本人?
Usually films and TV shows just have everyone fluently speak the same language even if they technically shouldn't, so it's pretty cool to have a film that takes the language barrier into account.
And you do speak English?
Of course.
Well then, you can go see some classes this afternoon.
Alright, now that you know the background of Blood, let's do some plot summarizing. It's 1966 in Japan. We open on a subway with no surfer in sight, just a tired-looking businessman and a fearsome-looking teenage girl. The lights flicker, and the girl rushes this man who attempts to flee from the sword-wielding maniac, but to no avail. Title card. The girl is named Saya, and as she exits the train, she runs into some suits who hand her next mission. There are a couple of creatures called Chiropterans running around the Yakata Air Base, and Saya's the only one capable of killing them. In fact, the guy that she just killed happened to be one of these Chiropterans, although not everyone's so sure of that.
What? This isn't a Chiropteran. Did we get the wrong guy?
You can basically think of Chiropterans as vampires, demons that feed on human blood and change their appearance to go unnoticed by the population. Speaking of, Saya's given a high school uniform, and she attends the local high school by the base so she can timely find her targets before they feed again, go into hibernation, and become untraceable. She quickly surmises the identities of the Chiropterans and deals with this delicate situation in a very subtle fashion. Tragedy strikes when Saya's sword snaps in two before she can take out the final threat. That doesn't stop her from carrying on with the mission though, since she trusts her partner David, the white man in black from earlier, to deliver a replacement blade when she needs it most. Sword! The mission is successful despite a surprise appearance in the final inning, and Saya and David peace on out. All evidence of their being there gets erased, causing some mild confusion from the one nurse on the base who actually witnessed the whole thing and lived to tell about it. Although she won't be telling anyone about it because she's not about to make an enemy of some shadow organization that hunts monsters around the world, and in all likelihood, no one's gonna believe her anyway. Because she's a woman. Unlucky, she does get interrogated by the authorities, and the last thing she sees is a picture of the same girl who saved her, dated 1892, with the word vampire written on the back. She goes back to the school, sits at her desk, and wonders just who this Saya character was, and if she's still out there, fighting what lies in the shadows of the world she thought she knew. Blood the Last Vampire is a lot of things, but I'm not really sure if it counts as a movie. Its total runtime is just 45 minutes, and I think a bulk of the criticism most people have surrounding this film stems from that. There are so many ideas that are hinted at within the film, but never developed because there simply wasn't enough time to do so. What are the Chiropterans? Are they just reskinned vampires? Is Saya a vampire? Why does her blood cause one of the monsters to disintegrate? What's the deal with David and that other guy who only showed up at the start? You get the idea. There's a lot of questions left on the table. A little bit of mystery is totally fine, but some of this stuff feels like it should have been addressed over the course of the film, but the only reason it didn't is because it got cut due to production issues, which is essentially what happened. It was the first digitally animated film in Japan, and that means a lot of the production time went into just learning how to use all the new tech. This makes the film feel less like a movie and more like a pilot, or, if I wanted to be mean, a glorified tech demo. But a very pretty tech demo, if nothing else. The overall look and feel of The Last Vampire is perfectly executed, I'd say. The fights are visceral and the atmosphere is dirty and dark. It's a great mix of action and horror that never has a dull moment. The animation is weighty and weirdly realistic. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's the best way I can describe the movement and the little actions all the characters make that make them all feel like people. And the way that it looks, those muted grays and browns, it's got this mature, suspenseful air to it all. Then there's the character designs by Tetsuya Terada, which blend together the low-light animation to make something so unique. God, I love some thick outlines, although some of these design choices are a bit questionable. For one, what's with the lips, man? I gotta ask. I mean, they are so there. It's hard to ignore them. Let me just read a quote here about Terada's art.
It explodes with energy, overflows with Baroque lineation and voluptuous figuration, exploits color like a chameleon with multiple personality disorder.
Yeah, I'm not an art guy, but I'm pretty sure what this quote is saying is that Terada's artwork is distinct. And you know what? I'll take it. Sure, it may not be the most pleasant design, but it really does visually convey Saya's character. She's aggressive and cold and kind of a bitch, but also, a girl. This design is perfect for her. She looks exactly like how you'd expect someone with her qualities to look, instead of just being some, I don't know, cutesy figurine that walked off the shelf. Look, to be honest with you, we've gone so far down the Moe rabbit hole at this point that a design like this is never showing up again, and that kind of makes me sad. So, you know what? Forgive me for appreciating that someone decided to do something different. And besides, I mean, didn't we all get into anime in the first place because it looked different? Or was it just because the girls were cute? You know, it was probably that. And I'm not even gonna judge you, man. I get it. But there is another thing I need to bring up regarding the designs. Some people have complained that the characters look too much like caricatures. More specifically, aside from how people look, there's the potential problem with how they sound. As I mentioned earlier, most of this film is in English, and that's the only version that was ever made. And it's actually pretty cool because for all the American characters, they got actual American voice actors. Like, even Steve Bloom shows up at one point to be one of the soldiers.
Who are you, ma'am? And who is this kid with you here?
The reason I label this as a potential problem, though, is that Saya and the nurse Mahiko, who are effectively the two main leads, are both Japanese. And, how do I put this nicely? You can tell.
And this is all I know. I've told you everything I've seen with my own eyes.
Not the same thing again. Do you want to announce it to the whole world?
But now here's the thing. I don't really mind it. And yeah, I know I'm coping and all that, but I think it makes sense for their English to be, not so great. Mahiko is a Japanese nurse working at a school filled with American kids. Obviously, she'd have to know a little English to get the job, but it'd be kind of weird if she, as a native-born Japanese, spoke perfect English, right? And as for Saya, she doesn't really talk that much, and just based on her attitude from the film, I got the sense that she only learned English as part of her job, so she doesn't really care if it sounds pretty.
Konnichiwa.
Leave me alone.
That's just how I view it. Also, to be clear, these actresses are really good, but both of them come from a live-action background, which it doesn't exactly prepare you for voice work. Although I think the bigger issue is probably that this is a Japanese movie with Japanese ADR. I mean, the sound team's not going to know what a good English line read sounds like because probably don't know English all that well. But now it's time for the final rating. The Last Vampire is very difficult for me to grade. On a technical level, it's highly impressive and still holds up well over 20 years later, but on a narrative level, it's pretty bare bones. It's not bad by any stretch, but all I could think about once I finished it were all the many unanswered questions and unexplored ideas, and because the next two installments aren't directly related to this film, it never got the chance to deliver on all the setup. I knew that going in, so the end result didn't bother me too much. I guess if anything, it got me excited for the other anime in this franchise, just because I wanted to see what they did. My honest reaction was, well, that was pretty fun. Shame it's just a one and done. I would have liked to see more. Oh well, on to the next thing. Except we're not going on to the next thing just yet. First, I want to talk about the manga. It's a sequel with the same name, but set in 2000 instead of the 60s. Once again, Saya has to go undercover at a high school to exterminate more Chiropterans. She makes nice with one of the girls who just so happens to know one of the Chiropterans. And, one thing leads to another until Saya is face to face with Maya, one of the two Chiropterans she's supposed to kill, and her predecessor, or maybe I should say her prototype. Here's the big revelation. The Chiropterans used to be happy-go-lucky campers sitting around the campfire with human beings listening to John Lennon's Imagine on repeat. But some scientists in the 1800s started experimenting on these creatures in the hopes of achieving immortality. All that experimentation led to an increase in socioeconomic factors, resulting in Chiropterans that act like the ones from the movie. Maya was created as a weapon to fight these new man-made monsters, but her creators, they weren't able to work out all the kinks, so she still needs to drink blood and sometimes turns into an ugly-looking monster thing. Saya was the second attempt and the completed version of Maya. She doesn't need to drink blood and she won't turn into a monster, but she is effectively immortal. Maya had actually been seeking out Saya, hoping to have Saya eat her so they could merge together and be one pure-blooded Chiropteran. It's unclear if Saya does merge with her, but Maya's body is never found, and the manga ends with Saya going rogue, killing her handler and walking off into the night. Just like the film, the manga is short. Just one volume, 6 chapters. And to be honest, I don't think it used its length effectively. The first half barely touches on Saya and the questions surrounding her, which, that was the whole reason I wanted to watch this thing. The film never actually tells you what Saya is. It's called The Last Vampire, and that word does appear on one of her photos, but she never refers to herself as one, and like I just said, she doesn't seem to exhibit all of the trademarks of a vampire. She doesn't drink blood, and sunlight doesn't seem to bother her. The only vampiric things I can think of is that she gets a little upset if you name drop Jesus Christ.
Oh, Jesus.
Wait, Saya, get a hold of yourself now!
That and her ultimate technique is to slit her own wrist and bleed everywhere, but does that make her a vampire or a My Chemical Romance fan? That's what I wanted the manga to answer, and it gets there, but first we have to spend some time with a girl who's getting bullied for being mixed race. Actually, I'm not even sure if you can call this bullying. It's straight up abuse and attempted murder. I think a series of shocking scenes is probably the best way to describe the first 2/3 of the manga. Half of this stuff just seems like gratuitous. Did we really need to see the girl piss herself? I'm kind of getting Elfen Lied flashbacks right now, I'm not gonna lie. Actually, I don't know if this is a good segue or not, but partway through the manga, I started to feel like maybe I needed to double check something. So I went to the page on My Anime List, and I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Then I decided to look at the author's page to see what other stuff he's done. And I'll just read his bio. He makes hentai manga, but not just the kind of hentai manga that features as much overt sex as possible and little realistic storyline. Tamaoki's stories display a great sense of psychological detail and usually end in a refreshing way. He says about his work,
I want to create hentai manga that convey a feeling of everyday life.
I think I read hentai. Let's just move on to the next entry. If Blood the Last Vampire was Ghost in the Shell, then Blood Plus is Ghost in the Shell. It's not a sequel, but it is heavily inspired by the previous film. There's also a few members of the production team that worked on both, including Junichi Fujisaku, a planning assistant for the Blood series that's been there since the beginning. He got bumped up to director and head writer for this new installment that was released in 2005. Now, at this point in time, the franchise wasn't in the best of shape. The Last Vampire was old news. People moved on. It didn't help that all the sequel material to the film failed to garner the same level of appreciation. Besides that manga, there were a couple of video games that were exclusive to Japan, and a trilogy of light novels that are really difficult to track down. The general consensus on these things is less than favorable. Each entry still felt like it was lacking something. The overall story of Saya stagnated, and with a market that started to feel saturated with all this new vampire media, Blood no longer stood out. If Fujisaku wanted it to survive, he'd need to do something different. But not so different that it would be unrecognizable. The old film proved the premise had merit. The story just needed to be expanded. Saya Otanashi is your typical basic average girl, except she's anemic and also can't remember anything about her life beyond the previous year. She lives in Okinawa with her adopted family, and I know what you're thinking, you sick freak, but I'm here to inform you the show did not dare to ask what Stepbro was doing. They sort of flirt with the idea a little bit in the anime, but they never commit. Because they're cowards. Although, hey, would it really be that bad for a guy and a girl who knew they weren't related and only lived with each other as siblings for a year to throw themselves into the fires of passion? Yes. Yes, it is actually. And I'm saying yes because this is where we started, and now the current meta is being reincarnated as a pregnant teen's baby and marrying your twin sister. Wow! I could actually hear the first of the Seven Seals breaking as I said that line. That's crazy. We got off track. Saya lives her quiet little island life where every day is the same and nothing ever happens until one day things are very much not the same and something does in fact happen.
でもナイフみたいなのを持ってたし、あれきっと名護の通り魔ですよ。警察に知らせた方が。
She's attacked by a man-eating monster, but saved by a mysterious metrosexual monster who force-feeds her his blood to save her life. She springs back to her feet and makes quick work of this beast, finishing it off using her own blood. The mysterious man reveals himself to be Haji, a servant of Saya who's been faithful for a good long while. He's a man of few words and gets even quieter when Saya inquires about her past, but she understands that he's on her side, so she leaves it alone and focuses on the here and now. At this point, a secret organization called Red Shield gets involved. Now, they've had agents monitoring Saya for some time, but they had largely let her live this fake, normal life. They didn't want to go after her because of her amnesia. The hope was that she would naturally start to remember her own past and seek out Agent David of her own accord to continue the good fight against these creatures called Chiropterans. But the situation has changed now that these monsters have found out her location. As it turns out, there's another secret group that's been working behind the scenes, slowly amassing a great deal of wealth and influence all over the world. The Chiropteran that attacked Saya, well, it actually escaped a lab belonging to this nefarious cabal. Not much is known about them, but according to David, the lives of every last person on Earth could be at stake. Saya doesn't like the sound of that, but she's not so confident that she can do anything in her current state. She's not even sure if she can believe everything she's being told by David and her adoptive father, who also happens to be a member of Red Shield. But then another Chiropteran shows up, and Saya's father is kidnapped and changed into something that isn't human anymore. He's a Chiropteran now. Some of his humanity managed to linger on, but it's fading and fast. There's no cure for his condition. He's gonna end up a mindless, bloodthirsty demon. The only thing that can stop it is Saya's blood.
Saya, 何があってもお前の信じる道を行け。お前の過去を受け入れろ。つまずいたら思い出せ。なんくるないさ。明日のために今日を生きろ。笑顔を忘れるな。
Ultimately, Saya decides to fight. She and Haji join up with David, his partner Lewis, and a quack named Julia Silverstein. Wait a minute. Silverstein? And she's one of the Chosen? With ample bosom. Let's not get distracted. Saya's brothers from other mothers, Kai and Riku, also tag along since they don't really have anything better to do. The mission to save the world takes them from Japan to Vietnam and then Russia, and then France and the UK, and then finally the only real country that matters. Along the way, they make new friends, fight different types of Chiropterans, uncover a conspiracy to turn all humans into blood-sucking monsters, and rediscover Saya's forgotten past. Not only is this chick a Chiropteran, she's a queen. One of two, in fact. The other being her twin sister, Diva, who had something of a troubled childhood. Both girls were originally just cocoons inside an Icelandic mummy dissected out by two scientists, Joel and Amschel Goldsmith. They only happened to see these girls after accidentally exposing the cocoons to blood. The brothers then decided to do a little test. Joel's gonna raise one of the girls as his daughter, who he names Saya, the same name as the mummy they got. He gives her a bunch of love and spoils her silly, all while studying her reactions and keeping her true nature a secret from her. As she grows up and stops growing up, he starts to send suitors her way to find out how her species reproduces. A little creepy, but it's for science or whatever. The other girl gets the short straw. Amschel wants to use her as his personal test subject, so she's locked up in a cage and experimented on daily. Saya doesn't even realize that she has a sister until one day she hears her singing and starts chatting with her in her free time. She's also the one to give this girl the name Diva because of her beautiful singing voice. After meeting in secret, Saya decides to let Diva out of her cell, that way Joel can hear this beautiful voice as a present for his birthday party. Saya then leaves to go get Joel some rare flowers, but when she returns to the mansion, she finds it up in flames, and Joel and all of the staff are dead. As it were, all of those experiments took their toll on Diva. Unlike Saya, she resents Joel and all of humanity because they never showed her any kindness. The only thing she wants to do now is kill as many people as she can. Diva runs off, and Amschel actually goes along with her. He proclaimed his undying devotion to her, drank her blood, and became her first Chevalier, which is just a fancy way of saying Tier 3 sub. By the way, these two are the cops behind all the Corruptorants that Saya and Red Shield have to fight now. Alright, how about some fun trivia about Joel and Amschel? Joel is a kind father to Saya, and his descendants lead the Red Shield organization, using their wealth to save people from Corruptorants. Also, the wiki states he's named after the father of the Goldschmidt process, and he's buried in a Christian cemetery. On the other hand, Amschel, who uses his wealth for unethical science experiments aimed at creating the perfect being while also positioning himself to rule over the unclean masses that will be turned into monsters should he succeed, is named after Amschel Rothschild. What did they mean by this? Even though Amschel is technically a servant of Diva, he's just using her for his own twisted goals. Part of that includes studying the ins and outs of human beings and Corruptorants. Like I said earlier, his endgame is creating the ultimate life form, and he'll do whatever it takes to get that done. His experiments result in the creation of these artificial Corruptorants called the Schiff, who are very similar to the typical Corruptorants, except they have vampire aids. They also have some more of the traditional vampire weaknesses, like an aversion to sunlight. They don't stick around for too long because of the aforementioned AIDS, except for the lolly, because the show did realize it could capitalize on having an immortal little girl that doesn't age. Japan is quite gifted with these things. Besides Amschel, Diva has several other Chevaliers. Solomon is the pretty boy of the group and became Diva's second Chevalier during the Russian Revolution. He's also a relative of Amschel, but the two have very different views on Diva. Solomon, just like his biblical counterpart, is a faithful servant. But, just like his biblical counterpart, he catches feelings for other women. He does genuinely want what's best for Diva, and eventually Saya too. He thinks Saya can be brought over to their side and they can all have a happy ending. But that's only because he doesn't realize Amschel's true plan until it's too late. He's definitely the most reasonable of Diva's henchmen, but that also makes him the one Amschel trusts the least, so the two are constantly butting heads. Diva's fourth Chevalier is Nathan. He doesn't really do all that much aside from writing plays and sexually harassing his cohorts. No, he's not actually gay. I'm pretty sure he's just European. Generally, he defers to Amschel's judgment, but he's always able to weasel his way into staying neutral. Also, I did skip Chevalier number 3 because he's only shown in a photo and apparently he was Hitler's secretary, but Amschel had Solomon kill him in 1945. What was he doing there? I don't know, they never say, but the Nazis loved their science experiments, so maybe they were researching Corruptorants too. I don't know. Back to Diva's harem. Chevalier number 5 is Carl, a crazy Vietnamese guy that Solomon brought into the fold and feels responsible for, since he's kind of the reason Carl got so crazy. This is also why he's not really part of the main four. He doesn't get to interact with Diva that much, and although the guy is head over heels for her, she doesn't really care about him at all. Diva's last Chevalier, and the most recent addition to her team, is a diversity hire. Now, I'm being serious. James is a stoic guy with mommy issues. He's probably the most loyal to Diva out of the bunch, but that leaves him susceptible to Amschel's trickery. He doesn't care for Solomon, and he's always having to stop Nathan from breaking his buck. And unlike the previously mentioned two, James has no interest whatsoever in Saya. He only sees her as a threat to his one and only. The last guy I should mention is someone who's not a Chevalier, but he is involved in the operation nevertheless. Van Argiano, Amschel's head scientist who handles most of the Corruptorant experiments. He's a sly guy with an affinity for hard candy. No, not that kind. I mean, I don't think so. He is French. Unsurprisingly, there's a great deal of infighting going on in Diva's camp throughout the series, but even though like half the members are trying to kill the other half, they still manage to always come out on top when it counts. Even when Saya takes out one of the big bads, it feels less like they won and more like they did Amschel a favor. Actually, the biggest obstacle for Amschel isn't even Red Shield and Saya, it's Diva. The girl is pretty whacked in the head. She's incredibly unpredictable and will sometimes just show up and kill a bunch of people because it's just so fun. Part of me is saying I could fix her, but another part of me is saying, at your service, your majesty. Also, she developed a one-sided crush on Saya's younger brother and, well, it doesn't go too well for him.
Right
Diva decided to pay Riku and Red Shield a little visit and ended up destroying the entire organization. Riku gets graped and grilled, Saya goes solo, and Haji tags along, and most of the scientists working for Red Shield, like Julia, get poached by the baddies to work for them instead. Now there's a bit of a time skip here. Saya has been hunting Chiropterans with no rest for a solid minute. Kai has grown up a bit and now works with Lewis and whoever's left from Red Shield to do the same. David, on the other hand, is kinda going through it, but he eventually reverts back to his wage cuck ways. Lastly, Diva has a new appearance from merging with Riku, and she looks like a little boy. Okay, I've made up my mind, I want to fix her. The good guy gang do some digging and some more fighting, and eventually figure out where Diva is and what Amshel's planning to do. The game of cat and mouse officially comes to an end, just as the world is seemingly coming to an end too. Saya and company launch a last-ditch effort to stop Diva and Amshel from using the consequences of the Industrial Revolution to change all humans into Chiropterans. Saya is successful. Mostly. And the series concludes with a happy ending for all the characters that didn't die along the way, while Saya goes into hibernation for the next 30 years to wait for the sequel that never happened.
おやすみ、さや。
Alright, as you can tell, I'm keeping things a little broad. I do a play-by-play like I did with the last vampire film, but that movie is just 50 minutes, and this series is 50 episodes. I'm trying to keep things moving and also, beat the video essay allegations. There are some specific scenes and character moments I will talk about, but I'm saving some of that for when we talk about the manga because there's going to be a fair amount of comparing going on. But before we even get to that, there are some general critiques and compliments I want to give. First off, the pacing. Blood Plus is a slow-moving show. Remember when I said that this story has the characters going all over the world to fight vampires? That might lead you to believe that they're constantly on the move, but it really doesn't feel like it. You can think of it like this. There's 50 episodes in 6 countries I mentioned. That means the venue changes on average every 8 episodes or so. The thing is, whenever they go to a new country, they tend to just hang around in the same area for the entire time that they're there. Conversations get repeated, fights follow the same formula, episodes start to blend together, and the overarching plot gets stretched so thin across each arc that it can almost feel like half the show is filler. But I hesitate to condemn the pacing fully. I never felt like things weren't going anywhere. And I think a big reason for that is the inclusion of all these characters that are doing their own thing in the interim between big events. And I'm not just talking about how we're constantly checking in with the various villains or the rest of the supporting cast who have their own stories playing out. I mean the people inhabiting these locations are always interacting with the main players. Sometimes you'll spot familiar faces wandering around in other characters' scenes, while the show shuffles between subplots that span multiple episodes. I don't think I'm doing a great job explaining it, but basically, the world continues to exist even when Saya's not there. People don't just spawn in. It's like they're actually going about their day and they naturally run into who they need to so that the story can progress. But concerning the characters, there's a common critique I've seen that I don't disagree with, but, well, let me just tell you what the problem is first. These characters, they're all pretty one note. Haji is loyal and has problems expressing himself. David is a no-nonsense soldier with a one-track mind. Lewis is laid back but reliable. Kai is dense but wants to protect people. Riku is a pure-hearted kid. Akihiro is a down-on-his-luck reporter. And Mao is the best character in the whole show, but she's criminally underused. Nah, that's a joke. She's second best. Because say what you will about the rest of the cast, I actually think this version of Saya is pretty great. At the start, she might just be a little bundle of joy that keeps freezing up and complaining that she gets the opportunity of a lifetime to be female Blade. But she gets more confident with every fight. She starts believing in the mission. She's not just being led around by others, like she wants to do this. And when her memories come back and she realizes she's the one who set Diva loose on the world, she takes the initiative to set things right. I'm not trying to sound like a feminist. I mean, I hate women, but I love good characters. And Saya, she's a good character with a very believable arc. I loved watching her become the hero the world needed, and I'm glad the show took its time to slowly build her up and break her down just a bit. She keeps getting stronger and winning most of her fights, but people still die. Sometimes it's complete strangers who just got unlucky. Sometimes it's soldiers who were trying to help her out. And sometimes it's the family that she wasn't strong enough to protect. Her fear of Chiropterans turns to hatred, and since she's a Chiropteran queen, she thinks of herself as part of the problem. Even someone like her, who was able to live among human beings, still caused so much hardship and pain for the people she loved. Her blood may kill monsters, but that just means she's a monster too. And there will always be a possibility that she can't control her true nature. There's only one way to save all the people she cares about. She has to kill all of her kind, and that includes herself. In the last arc of the show, she genuinely seems like she's lost all hope. At this point, she's lost almost everything. And then she finally confronts Diva, who's still wearing the face of her brother Riku. In every other encounter with Diva, Saya has lost, and lost badly. Right in front of her is the girl who took everything from her. Failure cannot happen anymore. If she loses here, the world ends and everybody dies. Saya is ready and willing to die for this. She goes into this fight fully prepared to do whatever it takes to win. And that's exactly what she does. She wins. But she doesn't die.
Diva. どうして私だけ。いやいや、姉様。Diva!
There are too many emotions filling Saya's head at this point. She hates Diva, and she has every right to, given what she's done, but they're still sisters. And while Saya got to live life like a princess, Diva was locked in a cage and treated like a lab rat. Regardless of that, there's no changing what's happened. Diva's murdered countless innocent people. Maybe she had her reasons, maybe not, but she's dead now. But she left something behind. A pair of twin babies. A new set of Chiropteran queens. 2 more monsters that need to be dealt with. It's almost like fate stopped Diva from killing Saya because Saya's job wasn't done yet. Only her blood can kill Chiropterans made by Diva. Her kind can't be allowed to live. So she raises her sword and prepares to strike, but Kai stops her. He screams at her, tells her she's an idiot for thinking like that. She's not a monster, she's just a girl, a crybaby, and a glutton. She has every right to live on, and if anyone disagrees, he'll fight him, he'll protect her, he'll do whatever he has to for her sake, because she's his sister. Even Haji starts to speak his mind. He's always cared for her. The only thing that ever mattered to him was her and her happiness. He was prepared to follow her to whatever end, but now he has to disobey her because he loves her and he wants her to live. And deep down, Saya wants to live too.
生きたい。
Maybe it is a selfish desire. Maybe it is a case of foolish optimism. Or maybe this is the way to truly set things right. Who knows what's gonna happen now? Are these kids gonna take after Saya or Diva or both? No one can know for sure until they grow up. But you know what? It's just like Saya's father, who wasn't actually her father, George, always said. Things have a way of working themselves out. Live today, smile tomorrow. In other words, everything's gonna be okay, so stop being so black-pilled all the time. It's cringe. I like this ending. The message is clear. You should love yourself and believe in a better tomorrow, no matter how bad things get. And also, you're more than the sum of your biology, and the sins of the father, or I guess in this case the mother, don't pass to the kids. Everybody has a right to life, and you shouldn't decide on your own that the world's gonna be better off without you. It's a good theme, and I hope by focusing on this pivotal scene, I've shown you that the characters may not be perfect, but they work well enough to get the job done. Are they one note? Sure, but you put enough of them together and you let them play their notes, now you got a song. Are there missed opportunities or poorly paced character arcs? Absolutely. One that really bugged me was right after the time skip, when David is doing a big sad because he got pretty black-pilled in the last big fight. I don't have an issue with this once stoic and unrelenting David now being a smelly, pathetic drunk. That part makes sense to me. He was practically useless when it mattered most, and everything has fallen apart. Even his boss, the leader of Red Shield, is now bound to a wheelchair for the rest of his life because David wasn't good enough. So that stuff's fine. My problem is that this interesting direction for the character lasts an episode and a half. All it takes is a conversation and a surprise attack to snap him back too. David is very generic, and we were finally going into uncharted territory only to immediately return to port. Things aren't exactly the same as before since Kai has a little more say-so in the planning now, but I can't help but feel like things resolve themselves way too quickly. Alright, let's talk style now. The Last Vampire made waves in the visuals department. It was also a movie and not a TV show like this version. The visuals in Blood Plus are pretty decent. I mean, it's a show from 2005, and it looks like a show from 2005. Maybe a little above average for the era, but too often did I feel disappointed by the repetitive fight scenes. I know not every action show from the 2000s is gonna look like Full Metal Alchemist, but Blood Plus kept getting my hopes up because it would very often briefly show me some of the good stuff just to cut the fight short. It also got my expectations up way too high with the opening scene. That whole sequence is stylish and bloody and fluid and not representative of the majority of action scenes here. Don't get me wrong, Blood Plus is bloody. Shocking, I know. But it's just bloody. You might see a Chiropteran get diced up every so often, but when it comes to the human characters or Saya, the show tends to hold back a little too much for my liking. I mean, I thought I was gonna get like Elfin Lied, but instead I got Black Lagoon and not Roberta's Revenge, like just the TV show. And you know, that's fine. I just had certain expectations because of something. There are a couple of scenes where we get to see something juicy, but compared to The Last Vampire, it's a little light. Although there is still child rape, so, you know, it's like Berserk or something. Speaking of The Last Vampire, the weighty, more realistic fights of that film are largely absent from this series. That's not to say that it never happens. There are a couple of quick bouts that go pretty hard, but they usually involve people-on-people action. When Chiropterans get involved, it's kind of a different story. The fights here are a bit more like shonen anime, maybe. You know, flashier moves and conversations happening mid-swing, you know, that kind of thing. Which, I mean, I'm not gonna say that's not my thing, but I do prefer the film's approach to the fights. But if we're talking music, Blood Plus wins. And that's not surprising considering who they got to do the soundtrack. Hans Zimmer's friend, Mark Mencia. IG reached out to Han first, but he was pretty busy with Pirates of the Caribbean, the first Weeaboo, and... Wait a minute, he did Madagascar? I didn't... Oh. Zimmer did find the project interesting though, so besides personally recommending his buddy Mencina for the job, he stayed on as a producer. Zimmer and Mencina's inclusion was no accident. Just like with The Last Vampire, IG was once again attempting to appeal to that American market. The songs sound pretty good to my Western barbarian ears, so I guess it paid off. There's one last notable factoid about the music, and it involves one of the openings. The third one, Colors of the Heart by Uverworld. It's a good song. It had me hooked from the first time I listened to it, but it sounded familiar to me somehow. After a few listens, I realized why that was. It's the song Narmak used for his first SpongeBob anime opening. That is the legacy of Blood Plus, I guess. Yeah, all the openings are pretty good and all, but the endings are something else. Not talking about the songs, I mean the art. I love it, and I really wish the show looked closer to it. There are times when it does, like when Solomon partakes in the ritual to be Diva's servant, but usually things are flatter and less stylized. It is a shame, and it's also a good segue to the manga. 3 manga titles released concurrent with the anime series. The first is simply called Blood Plus, and is basically a retelling of the anime, but with certain changes. The first chapter mirrors the anime's first episode pretty closely, but it doesn't take too long for the narrative to deviate. There are things that happen in the manga that never happened in the anime, and vice versa. Character deaths are shuffled around, entire subplots are completely dropped, and new details for the main players are revealed that drastically change certain relationships. And I gotta say, most of these changes are really good changes. The biggest issue in the anime by far for most people was definitely its slow pacing. Not a problem in the manga, things are constantly moving forward, actual pedal to the metal pacing, which could have been a new problem had the manga kept all the characters from the anime. But it doesn't. Half of the cast gets gutted in favor of focusing on the main players and exploring their past and relationships with each other, not to mention making them feel more impactful to the overall story. Let me give you an example of how this plays out by comparing how the anime and how the manga cover Saya's early life with Joel. In the anime, there are 2 separate episodes that cover the important events. In episode 22, we see a somewhat pompous and spoiled Saya and a young Haji who Joel intends to mate with Saya at some point. There's also some peeks at Joel and Amschel's experiments. We see Saya get her medicine, which is human blood gathered from who knows where. Most of the screen time is dedicated to Haji and Saya becoming accustomed to each other's quirks. She thinks he's too moody and unrefined, and he thinks she's a brat and he's not too happy about essentially being a slave, which, I mean, I guess that's a fair point. But they do eventually come to understand one another. Haji is much older now, but Saya hasn't aged a bit. He starts to realize there's more going on than he's been led to believe, but that gets put on the back burners because Joel's birthday is coming up. Saya decides to get him a rare blue flower that she saw blooming on the side of a nearby cliff, but before she sets off to get it, she hears that song. Alright, we've kind of already covered this part before, so we're gonna speed it up a little bit, but yeah, she names the girl Diva, opens the cell, and begs her to sing at Joel's birthday. Then she leaves Diva and goes with Haji to pick that flower. Because it's in such a dangerous place, Haji decides to retrieve it himself, but ends up falling to his death. Saya, having overheard a conversation earlier about how important it is to have blood flowing inside you, elects to give Haji some of her blood, and unintentionally turns him into a Chiropteran, her very first Chevalier. It's a bit traumatic for the both of them, but not quite as traumatic as the sight they see once they get back to the mansion. Yeah, it's a totally decent section of the story, and I really didn't have much of an issue with it when I first watched it. My only complaint was that Saya seemed flat out careless at times. Like, I get that she's spoiled and doesn't fully comprehend mortality and risk, but releasing some chick you just met and the whole cliffside excursion seems a little dumb, even for her. But I guess that does make her guilt over this day that much more weighty, which the show embraces, so yeah, I'm not gonna complain that much. But what did the manga do? Well, for starters, it combines both of these episodes, so everything happens in one go. It once again starts with a pompous and spoiled Saya meeting Haji for the first time to a less than stellar introduction. Now here's the first big change. Saya already knows about Diva, even before she met Haji. In fact, Saya has been secretly meeting with Diva regularly to vent about how terrible all of Joel's conjured up suitors are. And the 2 girls are like the best of friends. Saya doesn't realize they're related, but their bond speaks for itself. The blue rose thing gets repurposed as Saya's test for Haji, one that she fully intends him to fail. But once he comes back with one of those roses, her opinion of this guy starts to change. Similar to the anime, the 2 become friends. But one day, Saya gets injured and starts to bleed. She panics and tries to hide her hand from Haji before he sees her immediately regenerate. She's ashamed of her abilities. She thinks of herself as some kind of a monster, and she's scared she's gonna lose Haji's friendship once he finds out. This is the main reason she's so close with Diva. They're both told they're monsters, and they're both alone. Saya locks herself up in her bedroom for a while, succumbing to the big sad, but Haji breaks in through the window to give her the medicine she needs, and I'm not talking about the blood she's drinking. Eventually, we get to Joel's birthday party, and once again, there's a major difference. We've already done that flower retrieval thing, so Saya and Haji stay at the mansion for the party. Saya still lets Diva out for the same reason, but now this happens. Diva kills Haji right after being freed. Saya's wondering what's taking Diva so long to get to the party, and she goes looking for her only to find Haji's body. Then Joel shows up to tell her how she can save him, but then he notices that Diva is missing. So they go back to the party and find Diva killing everyone. Amschel's there too, and when Diva casually mentions how she just murdered Haji, Saya snaps. It's not all that clear what happened next. All we do know is that Diva and Amschel got away, and none of the mansion's guests or staff survived, all except Joel. But his wounds are too great. He's not gonna make it. He begs Saya to stop her sister, to fix his mistake, to keep his sin a secret. And with his dying breath, he tells Saya, "I realize now when I discovered you 2, I should have never let you live." Haji comes back to life as Saya's first Chevalier. He almost can't believe the devastation he sees. Saya can't help but apologize. It's all her fault. Joel was right, and her mission is clear. Total Chiropteran death. This is just one example of how the manga does things. It's not a retelling of the anime story, it's a better telling of the anime story. There's more emotional scenes, more depth given to each character, and more absolutely explicit and wild moments. Now, you don't really see that in this example I just used. I mean, I guess it's more explicit in that it makes Joel far more unsavory with all the servant and suitor killing for the sake of Saya's daily doses, also the carnage left by Diva. But when I say wild, I mean moments that are completely out of pocket, like when Carl shows up in the manga. Yeah, that's the same guy. Some stuff happened, it doesn't matter. I mean, just look at this, right? Towards the start of the manga, Saya gets crushed during a school play, so she drinks some of Mao's blood to heal herself. That way she can fight off the goons and the gooner, and it's just wild, man. Everything is exaggerated. The gore, the expressions, the characterization, all of it. And I love it. It's Black Lagoon all over again, not the TV series, Roberta's Revenge. Reading the manga makes the anime feel almost stale in comparison. I do appreciate that the anime kept a serious tone throughout, but I felt like it could have done with some well-placed black comedy. There are funny moments in the manga that I didn't care for, but most of the time, it worked for me. Same with the scary moments. The Chiropterans from the anime, they're fine as far as monsters go, but they never sent a shiver down my spine the way they were supposed to. In fact, after a while, I started to think, they look kind of goofy. But in the manga, they are absolutely terrifying. Alright, I think you get the point I'm making. The manga is the definitive blood experience. Or at least that's what I want to say. But here's the thing. I really like this manga because I watched the anime. Let me reiterate something. I like Blood Plus. It's a solid, good show, a true 7 out of 10 experience if ever there was one. It has plenty of things that I don't like, but it also has some stuff that I really love. So, average it out 7 out of 10. That's what I'd rate it if you maybe put a number to the name. I enjoyed the cast of the anime. I liked the moments of downtime too. I liked how there was always something for these guys to do, even if you could cut them out and still get from point A to point B. As the saying goes, you don't know what you got till it's gone. A couple of minutes ago, I mentioned a scene with Mao and Saya from the manga. That's the last time we see her. And this scene is from Volume 1. She's not part of the supporting cast. And her partner in crime, Akihiro, he's not even in the manga. So many characters and plot lines get shafted in the manga. And sure, I didn't really care about the shift all that much, so I don't mind their exclusion in the manga, but it does bother me that James and Nathan now have hardly anything to do. The trade-off is that Amschel, Solomon, and Carl get more development, but was it worth it? Did we need to make that trade? So many times while reading the manga, I went through something like this. Wow, this is pretty great. Saya just went berserk and killed some of her own guys while fighting against Diva, and now Julia's pissed at her, calling her a monster. I mean, this is heavy stuff. If I substitute Julia's character with her anime counterpart, since manga Julia basically is a background character with a name. She doesn't even have a romance subplot with David anymore. And she won't end up working for Amschel in the second half because that plotline gets cut out too. The one notable thing she does in the manga is be a message, I guess. I don't know how good the manga is when you separate it from the anime. Its best moments are only so amazing because there was a 50-episode anime doing most of the grunt work for it. When you take away all the stuff exclusive to the anime, you're left with a manga that's just a patchwork of great moments. But even if you keep the anime exclusive stuff in, then you're left with a difficult decision of deciding which version's key moments you're going with. Like, I prefer Saya's time at the zoo in the manga, but I prefer the series ending from the anime. Do you see why it's difficult for me to grade the manga now? As a separate story, it's okay, but as a supplement to the anime, it's peak. If I pick and choose only the stuff I prefer. It's definitely something I'm glad I read. And everyone should read it too, but it comes with so many caveats that I don't know if I can really recommend it unless you're committed to doing both the anime and the manga. I'm not going to spend as much time on the other two manga. Both of them are prequels. sort of. First is Blood A. A is set during the Russian Revolution in the 1910s, and you can probably guess what that means. We're bringing in some real-life figures like the Romanovs and Rasputin. Saya and Haji aren't in Russia for a romantic honeymoon. They've been on Diva's trail for a while now and tracked her all the way to Petrograd. They fall in with the Royal Orchestra and infiltrate the Tsar's palace. That's when they meet some of the Romanovs and Rasputin, who's been healing the sick with his mystical ways. Red Shield is still in its infancy, but they've managed to get some intel that suggests there's a Chiropteran disguised as someone in the palace, and it seems like it's one of Rasputin's patients, who just so happens to be Saya's newest friend. Saya takes her out based on orders from Red Shield, but it turns out she did an oopsie because the orders were forged. More Chiropterans then show up, and it turns out Rasputin's a bad guy. Very shocking. But also Princess Anastasia had gotten eaten, absorbed, and replaced by Diva. Kinda shocking. It all culminates in a big mission failed, we'll get them next time. Obviously, Saya and Haji survive, but most of the people they were trying to protect don't. Amshel shows up to reclaim Diva, and as for Rasputin, well, Amshel didn't like sharing his Discord kitten. And that's more or less Blood A. Some pretty cool ideas and interesting character moments packed into a quick 2 volumes. Similar to the last vampire manga, I'm not sure Blood A used its length as effectively as it could have. It definitely spends more time on the one person we all care about, but some of these guys don't really add anything to the main story. But the little pieces of information that we do get, like Rasputin trying to figure out why Chiropterans made by Chevaliers turn out monstrous, were very much appreciated. Also, anything involving Saya, Haji, or Diva was handled way better than I expected, given the circumstances of how this manga came to be. I mentioned it earlier, but all of these manga came out while the show aired, and each author had a great deal of creative liberty at their disposal. There are a few key details and plot points that were required to stay the same, but otherwise, these manga could more or less do their own thing. A blessing and a curse. A blessing because some of the things these manga do are great and wholly absent from the anime, and a curse because there's a very apparent lack of connective tissue between each manga and everything else. Blood A's blessing was that we got to see a different side of both Saya and Diva. This is early Saya on basically her first real mission. While she's still pretty goofy and somewhat unsure of herself, she's also pretty cold and committed already. Something we wouldn't see in Blood Plus until she gets all of her memories back. But even when that happens in the anime, she doesn't really act like how she acts here, which is a shame because I like how she acts here. We see the same thing with Diva. She's still pretty crazy here, just like in the anime, but her story with Alexei in Volume 2 shows us something new. Diva forms a connection with him that's completely different from her relationships with basically every other servant. She's initially pretty dismissive of this Russian prince, but after he's turned and allowed outside of the palace for the first time in forever, she realizes he's not all that different from her. Both of them were confined to a room all their life, forced to choke down medicine and be prodded by strangers and family members alike. His love for her feels genuine, and Diva even seems to express a little remorse when Saya kills him, which is a great scene in its own right. I like that we got to see this. It adds more emotion and context to Saya's fight against Diva and her actions at the end. But now for Blood A's curse. It can sometimes feel pretty disconnected from the story it's supposed to be a prequel to. You'd think some of the stuff that went down in Blood A would get mentioned in the main series because some of it is pretty traumatic, but no, it's not. Even when Saya gets her full memory back. Her time in Russia does come up in the anime, but the way they talk about it almost makes it feel like nothing particularly remarkable happened. Then there's the contradictions. Episode 17 takes place after the ending of Blood A, and just before Saya goes into hibernation. She and Haji are tracking down Diva by following a claim that Rasputin was in a nearby town. They meet this girl, Sonia, who turns out to be Rasputin, and she fights off Saya as Diva gets carted off to safety. The problem is Blood A doesn't really fit into this episode, at least not cleanly. Rasputin being here isn't a problem since we see him meet Sonia at the end of Blood A after Amshel nearly kills the guy and tosses him into a river. Sonia even mentions her father did a bunch of experiments trying to create artificial people, which checks out for Blood A Rasputin. But then there's Amshel and Diva. They're still in the same carriage in Russia 2 years after Blood A ends, and Rasputin and Amshel are somehow on good terms and working together again. Also, anime Rasputin doesn't look like his manga counterpart, and Haji acts like he's never met this guy before. You see the problem? It doesn't feel like Blood A is connected to the anime, especially with the whole let's just forget this thing ever happened ending scene. And all that applies even more so to the Blood Plus manga. The result is that Blood A feels like a prequel to some other version of Blood we never got to see. Now, I know there's one more manga we haven't talked about yet, but I think I'm gonna skip it. It's just a 1-volume Haji solo story, but I never got to it because I felt a little tapped out after finishing Blood A. Also, this one's a boys love manga, and I gotta be honest, I don't really want to put myself through that. Blood A already had gay, incestuous Russian twins. I mean, there's only so much I can take. Blood Plus is not a sequel to Blood the Last Vampire. It's a retelling that expands on the events from the film, and even the manga too. Certain plot points are very similar in idea, but executed sometimes way differently. And other times, parts of the older story get chopped up and reintegrated with new characters or plot points. For instance, in The Last Vampire, Saya gets into an American military base by infiltrating the high school. In Blood Plus, there's a high school and the base in the first arc, but they aren't really related to each other. Her infiltrating a high school comes up in the next arc when she's in Vietnam, although that arc seems to be pulling a little more from The Last Vampire manga than the film since she makes a new friend and all that. But unlike the manga's version, this sequence of events is actually, pretty toned down, and no one's getting abused or anything. Well, there is like child trafficking and drug experimentation, but Saya gets to dance with a pretty boy, and it's a lot lighter in tone than the manga. Also from the manga is Diva. Sort of. Maya may not be present, and Saya's origin is altered, but it draws heavily from their interactions in the manga. You might even say that Blood Plus Saya would have turned out like Last Vampire Saya if she hadn't had Haji, Kai, and all the rest to keep her connected to humanity. It's interesting to see how ideas change between the two series, and yet both of them still feel so connected to each other despite all the differences. And I think the reason for that can be found in the Q&A with Kamiyama Kenji that follows the Last Vampire manga. In it, he stated that the series needed chiropterans, and they needed to be artificially created. And most importantly, Saya should be a tragic heroine bearing the fate of mixed blood. That's a very interesting choice of words there, and I assume that's why so much of the manga involved a mixed-race human girl and the discrimination she faced because of it. Kamiyama asks, is it possible that the killings of chiropterans start because of her sense of righteous indignation and her hatred towards her own blood? This is Saya's entire story in Blood Plus, and it's something that was right there from the beginning. It's wonderful that these ideas, which never got the airtime they deserved with the original film, finally found their way onto the screen. But Kamiyama also mentions that this was just his own personal theory, and that there are plenty of other ways to explore the world of Saya and chiropterans. I think it's time we look at another way of exploring the world of Saya and chiropterans. Continuing on with our analogy, if The Last Vampire is Ghost in the Shell and Blood Plus is Ghost in the Shell, then Blood C is Ghost in the Shell. Alright, actually, I haven't even watched that version yet, so I don't know if the joke makes sense, but rule of threes. Blood C is probably the most controversial version of Blood. I'm talking subject matter, I'm talking reception. But it might be the one that most people recognize, at least today. It was the first piece of Blood-related material that I got exposed to without my consent. Yeah, that's right. The first thing I saw for this franchise was that last sequence in the show where Rayman's rabbits start raving. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, some background info. Blood C is a 12-episode series created by the popular all-female manga artist group known as Clamp, which is why everyone is a Lankoid. It's technically a collaboration between Clamp and IG, with some of the people who worked on Blood Plus returning to lend their hand to the project. But the IG people mostly just wrote the dialogue and handled the fight scenes. And that's pretty much what Fujisaku wanted. Once Blood Plus finished up, Fujisaku took a look at all the criticism and desires expressed by the fans. One thing he noted was that people really wanted to see Saya in school again. So for this new series, things were kept to a smaller scale. relatively speaking, and new blood brought in to make sure the show didn't accidentally turn into Blood Plus 2.0. And I guess they succeeded. Blood C is certainly not Blood Plus. I don't think it's Blood the Last Vampire either. It's something else entirely. Bad, although that's just my opinion. Maybe you'll agree with me though once we go over the plot. Saya Kisaragi is just a small-town girl living in a lonely world. She took the midnight train going to hell. Demons. They are everywhere, and every night Saya goes out into the dark to do battle with these terrifying beings known only as the Old Ones. The battles are brutal. Often Saya only barely manages to survive, but luckily she has this strange healing ability that usually cleans up her more serious injuries before she sets off for school in the morning. And wouldn't you know it, this badass sword-wielding shrine maiden of justice is actually a ditzy dumbass with a sweet tooth and bad eyesight. Saya's also got some friends: woman, simp, twins, and bad boy. There's also a teacher lady, stoic father, and a coffee shop guy who gives her free food. He's also very important. Oh yeah, and the talking dog, how could I forget? Saya is a very naive and trusting girl. She's got a good heart and just wants everyone in the town to live a nice, long, happy life. She's been battling the Old Ones ever since she could remember. It used to be the job of her late mother, but after her passing, Saya's father entrusted this responsibility to her. Now, it's during one of these fights her demonic opponent mentioned something about a covenant made between humans and the demons, and it's been violated somehow, which is why they all have to die now. Now, Saya doesn't know what to make of any of this, and can't seem to think on it for too long without passing out. Besides the Old Ones alluding to some mystical mumbo-jumbo, Saya's friends sometimes say some pretty odd things too. Also, they start dying, which understandably starts to affect the poor girl. She needs to find out how to stop the Old Ones once and for all, but she doesn't seem to be getting anywhere. That is, until Teacher Lady takes her on a trip to her father's library and reveals the truth. Saya has been living a lie. All her memories were implanted in her brain for the sake of some cruel experiment. All the townspeople are actors, and all her friends that died are very much still alive. But only because they're part of the main cast. Yeah, the rest of the townspeople, they actually did die for real.
I read about did you say want?
Anyways, it's revealed Saya isn't even human. She's actually one of the Old Ones, but bound in human form. At some point before the series starts, she had sworn an oath to never kill humans and hunted her own kind to protect the innocent. But the mastermind behind this experiment, Fumito, who was running the coffee shop and feeding Saya, like, weird blood-infused candy the whole time, wanted to see if he could get Saya to break that oath. But Teacher Lady and most of the main cast had started to get annoyed at how anytime some progress was being made on breaking Saya, she'd always just revert back the next day. That's why they decided to speed things up by being as direct as possible. Unfortunately, Fumito was not happy with their decision, so they get punished. But the damage is already done, and Saya gets all her old memories back and declares war on Fumito. Realizing that the experiment has failed completely, Fumito decides to wipe the slate clean. By that I mean he releases some artificially created Old Ones to kill pretty much everyone.
How amusing. It appears you're the only member of the main cast to survive.
Well, I can't die. I have goals to accomplish.
My goodness, what an idea. Why didn't I think of that?
And that's Blood C. Now, the movie, Blood C: The Last Dark, acts as the finale and has Saya track Fumito down, team up with the Neats from Eden of the East, I'm not joking, get betrayed by the leader of said Neats, but ultimately succeed in killing Fumito and saving humanity. Alright, where do I even begin with this? How about Blood C's biggest problem? It's so boring. Yeah, not exactly what you'd expect, huh? It is pretty impressive considering that every episode, something like this happens.
What the hell's going on?
Remember how I described Blood Plus as a little slow, poorly paced in some sections? But I never said boring. Now, I didn't feel this excruciating urge to binge the entire show in a single day, but I was comfortably knocking out, like 5 episodes a day. These episodes had enough character moments, action scenes, and unsolved mysteries to keep my attention and keep me coming back. I did not have that same experience with Blood Sea. I was struggling to get through just 2 episodes a day. I don't know how they did it, but somehow it feels longer than Blood Plus despite being a fraction of the size. I think the reason that it feels like that is because nothing happens. It's so formulaic. Every episode there's a new monster of the week that shows up out of nowhere and Saya has to protect people from it. And it's cool and all, but when that's not happening, and believe me, for most of the show, that's not happening, it's just occasional mysterious narration and cryptic conversations topped off with way too much slice of life shenanigans. And when I say slice of life shenanigans, I mean the most boring, bland, by-the-book bullshit you've seen 20 times by now. And the cherry on top is that it's all intentional. They wanted it to be boring because that's the big twist. Everyone in this show, besides Saya, knows it's a dumb, uninspired farce that's gone on for too long.
We want this stupid thing to end already!
That might sound like a smart twist that retroactively makes all the previous scenes amazing, but it doesn't. And there's 2 big reasons for that. First, the writers knowing that their story is bad doesn't all of a sudden make it good. If I'm serving you some spaghetti and instead of tomato sauce, I just piss in the bowl and tell you to enjoy the slop, you're probably gonna say, dude, this is bad, I don't want this. But then I say, oh, don't worry, I know it's bad. Trust the plan. Wink? No, do not trust the plan. The plan sucks.
Stupid. Yeah, for real.
The other reason this twist fails is because they tried to have their cake and eat it too. The writing is consistently terrible no matter what point in the show you're looking at. Pre or post twist, it doesn't matter. It just sucks. Here's what I mean. All of Saya's friends turn out to be actors who only pretend to like her for a paycheck. This includes her main love interest, Bad Boy, and it also includes Simp until he randomly reveals in the last 5 minutes of the show that he actually loved her the whole time. And it really just comes out of nowhere. Just 1 episode prior, he sees Saya going through it because the others told her the truth, and he doesn't seem to care all that much about her condition. In fact, he sounds more annoyed that the experiment just got ruined and that he might not get his paycheck.
They haven't even killed me off yet. Now look at what you've done to her. She's been weakened.
Then flash forward to the next episode and really analyze this next scene. Saya rushes towards Fumito, sword in hand, but one of Fumito's soldiers gets a couple shots on her and brings her to the ground. Then he appears to take aim at Saya so as to finish her off, so Simp tackles him to the ground and then rushes over to her. The soldier immediately gets back up, shoots Simp, then shoots him a little more, and then just leaves without finishing off Saya. What? So he was never gonna kill her then, right? Or did he forget? And what is Simp doing here? He was about to get in the car with Fumito and Woman, and he was gonna get what he was owed for doing his part, but he threw all of that away because...
Tell me why.
I'm not sure.
What?
I was supposed to be an actor in a silly game, but then, after a while, I think I started to really care about you. I couldn't help it.
You stupid bitch!
It's so stupid, and it's clearly only tacked on for the sake of excessive tragedy. The show never took the time to properly set up any of this. It just happens. Everything in this show just happens. Monsters appear at random because it's time for an action scene. Characters phase in from an alternate plane of existence just to be killed or see Saya kill something. No one acts like a real human being, and Saya definitely isn't a real hero because we need to see people get chopped up. The only aspect of this story that is interesting is immediately undercut because nothing changes. These people just go from bland to a different kind of bland. And what was the point? Is there some kind of message? Maybe something about the righteous indignation and hatred of your own blood? Apparently it's a love story, I guess. What's Fumito's reason for doing all the things he does in Blood Sea? Well, the movie explains it all. It all started off with world domination, but somewhere along the way, just like Simp in the TV series, he fell in love with Saya and just wanted to free her from herself or something.
勝者には君には褒美を敗者の僕には罰を
So there you have it. Blood Sea is a love story. A really crappy love story. No, actually, it's a comedy. A horror comedy. Now, I think it's time we mention the thing Blood Sea is most famous for. This one really lived up to its name. Now, I've seen my fair share of edgy schlock, which is why I can say Blood Sea might just have a shot at the championship belt. It is so senselessly violent that it genuinely becomes difficult to take it seriously. People act like idiots because, I mean, how else are you going to see the demons absolutely eviscerate everyone? You'd think having someone like Saya on the scene would mean more people make it out alive, but no, it's the opposite. Half the time, she just stands around and watches the carnage just long enough for the episode to meet its gore quota, and then she'll save who's left. And I know, it's all intentionally written like some horror B-movie, and that's why it's all so silly. But like I said earlier, they don't commit to that. The entire series suffers from atrocious writing, and it doesn't matter if you pick stuff before or after the big reveal in episode 11, it's always stupid. Even the small stuff. Do you know what the characters say about the school uniforms being black? They say this.
Maybe to hide, you know,
To hide what?
all the blood.
Yeah, that makes sense. When she kills those monsters, she gets soaked with blood. This way nobody sees it.
Speaking of things, most shows go from A to B and have a little connective tissue to make it all flow together, but here, things just happen. The explanations make no sense, or the show makes up new scenes to try and make it work. But it doesn't, because it's just edgy schlock through and through. At no point does it engage in anything that could be remotely mistaken for competent storytelling. The most absurdly crafted orgy of gore is at the end after the big twist, so we're supposed to take it seriously, but it's just too much. My brain cannot process an army of giant demonic bunnies decimating people in the most comically gruesome fashion imaginable. This show draws heavily from Lovecraft, and I think I really had a Lovecraftian experience watching the finale. I simply could not comprehend what I was seeing.
Bruh. Hey, please have the water.
Maybe I'm just in the wrong here. I don't know what I expected. Why did I think a show that had a fully naked Saya covered in blood in an opening that's jam-packed with random English and French lyrics to understand the concept of less is more? Look, I like gory anime. I even like edgy schlock. But what I don't like is when a series loses sight of the things that made it good. The Last Vampire may have been less gory than Blood Sea, but it was far more interesting. Even with pretty basic characters and the standard hunt the monster type story, The Last Vampire drew me in. It was more than pretty visuals and brutal fights. My biggest complaint was that it didn't have enough time to explore everything that was so interesting. Which brings us to Blood Plus. That series is absolutely the least gory entry, but I'd say it has the best characters and overall story out of all three of them. And I'm not counting anything that the manga added either, I'm just talking about the anime. I still have my complaints about that series, but most of my complaints boil down to, it's good, but it could have been better. And yes, I did praise the Blood Plus manga for having more gore and being more wild. There are plenty of moments that almost make it feel like edgy schlock, but the manga knew when to exercise some restraint. When it was time to get serious, it got serious. And it wasn't constantly trying to jam-pack every encounter with as much gore as possible because it understood that would be distracting. When it shows the worst day of Saya's life, there's a reason it doesn't blow its load on people dying in 20 different ways. It would turn this heart-wrenching scene which defines Saya's character into nothing more than slasher porn. But with Blood-C, it's like they missed the point of everything. The interesting premise of the film is completely abandoned, and the quality character writing from the old TV series is totally absent. All it has is shocking, gory, bloody moments. That's great for a top 10 list, even a montage if you want, but not a show. They do try to fix this with the movie. While things still get bloody from time to time, and there are plenty of odd contrivances that only exist to foster more unnecessary emotional trauma for Saya and company, it never gets as gratuitous as the TV series. I also found myself liking Saya a lot more in the film. She's back to her original state and feels more in line with the first version of the character, while having some traits unique to herself. The film also has a number of cute little callbacks to the other versions of Blood too. The title and opening sequence is very reminiscent of The Last Vampire. And Saya works for a guy in a wheelchair like Joel from Blood Plus, although, that could be a coincidence, I don't really know. But if you've seen my video on Fooly Cooly Grunge, then you know I'm not overly fond of reusing stuff from a beloved classic to cover for the new thing's lack of quality. In this case though, it's not nearly as offensive to me. It's similar enough to make you remember the old thing, but it uses that to demonstrate how things will be different this go around. And aside from Saya and Fumito, the main cast is also different, but they're either forgettable or annoying, except for New Joel. I guess he's alright. And yes, it is a very pretty looking movie. I still prefer the style of The Last Vampire film, but The Last Dark is very much number 2 in the overall visual rankings. But I really gotta ask, why blood? Why not call this something else? I mean, did it really have to be blood? I gotta tread lightly here because I don't want to piss off people again like I did with Trigun Stampede, but honestly, why make a blood anime and then change basically everything? I mean, it's not even a vampire anime anymore. Where are the Chiropterans? Do I need to pull up the Kamiyama Q&A? I guess the response to this is that Blood-C only changed the surface level stuff, but kept most of the same thematic elements. But I don't know how much I really agree with that. I mean, in some ways, it's a return to how it all started. The original pitch was just a high school girl in her uniform holding a katana, and that's what we got. In fact, you might even say it's like an alternate version of Blood Plus specifically. That was a series that tried to expand on everything brought up in the movie, but at the same time, it may not have had the best approach to things. One thing I noticed is that Saya in Blood Plus never becomes Saya from The Last Vampire, even after the time skip. She gets kind of close, but it's not the same character. And really, she could never be the same Saya because Blood Plus has Kai, who embodies the brasher, more abrasive side of Last Vampire Saya. Then there's the fact that Saya's Last Vampire origin from the manga gets turned into the Shift's origin story, sort of. And in the film, Saya mentions she can't kill humans, but in Blood Plus, the first thing we see her do is kill a bunch of humans. So with that in mind, it's almost like Blood-C's Saya is the same as Last Vampire Saya. They both wear the schoolgirl outfit and use a katana. They both have the same moody, abrasive, cold personality. They both are the subject of some kind of experiment, and they both can't kill humans. Maybe that's why the TV series didn't bother showing much of Saya before the experiment happened. You've already seen it, and now we're expanding on it. I'm not against that idea. I wouldn't mind more expansion on The Last Vampire, but I just don't like what Blood-C does with it. To me, at least, every aspect is less interesting. The Last Vampire had artificial vampires created to be the next stage of human evolution. That's a neat take on vampires. But Blood-C just has straight-up demons, and scientists making deals with demons to rule the world, and I mean, that's fine, I guess, but I just thought the other one had more interesting implications and potential for storytelling. Then there's Saya wearing a schoolgirl uniform. I guess I somehow haven't disappointed my parents enough yet because I don't really care about high school girls with superhuman abilities running around in their uniforms all day. I thought it was cool for The Last Vampire because of how it was incorporated into the story, but for Blood-C, it's just her design now, and I'm not gonna say it's my favorite design. And as for the no killing humans rule, when I heard that line in the film, I just thought she'd get chewed out by the top brass or swamped in paperwork for killing anyone who wasn't her target. Making it so that she can't physically kill humans could have been interesting if they leaned into it more, but it rarely comes up and basically has no impact on the story except for extending the life of Fumito's top guy for 30 minutes. I still don't get why he turned himself into a demon when he knew Saya couldn't kill humans. Like, dude, you had her beat. What are you doing?
You stupid bitch!
I hate to compare this to Fooly Cooly again, but it seems like IG was trying to replicate the circumstances that gave us The Last Vampire, just like how IG tried to replicate the circumstances that gave us Fooly Cooly when they worked on Progressive. And if it's not already obvious by my tone, I don't think it worked in either instance. But my dog water opinion didn't stop IG from doubling down on Blood C. Out of all the versions of Blood, Blood C is like the only one that got a bunch of sequels. Not anime sequels, live action stuff. A stage play and a live action movie trilogy. I don't know why they made these. I guess I'll never understand the fancies of the general Japanese audience. It's not the first time this has happened. The Last Vampire got a live action remake too. I just didn't mention it because I didn't watch it. It looked bad. Alright, look, I know I've been pretty harsh on Blood C, but I really did want to like it. Out of all of the entries in this series, it was the one that I was the most curious about. I needed to know, was it another elfin lead, or was it maybe like a Megazone 2-3? Was it schlock through and through, or was there an interesting story underneath all the devastation? It was the only one of the franchise that I was gonna watch, and I was gonna watch it first, and I was fully prepared for just edgy schlock. But then I got this bright idea to watch the last vampire film before Blood C, even though you don't have to because, I mean, it was just so short and I figured, why not? And that movie changed my plan. After I finished it, I had to see what Blood Plus was like. And I'm glad that I checked it out because it was fun and it got me even more curious about the rest of the franchise. So I went back and I read that Last Vampire manga. Felt a little disappointed, but still eager to see how the Blood Plus manga compared. And that manga was great. I love it. Didn't touch one of the prequels, but the other one wasn't half bad. Filled with plenty of things I could enjoy. But Blood C, that one I just couldn't bring myself to enjoy. Alright, let me backtrack a bit so people don't call me a boomer with bad taste in the comments. There are things I enjoyed about Blood C. The OST is solid, as are the fights, and I do like how Saya suffers some brutal injuries in these encounters too. And if I chose to divorce this show from everything else in the franchise and just look at it as edgy schlock, I'd say it's not half bad. Still pretty boring, to be honest, but overall, worth it. But of course, divorce is not real, so I will not do that. I know people just want to say it's doing its own thing, so judge it on its own merits, but that's not how this works. Blood C does not exist in a vacuum. It's part of a franchise. You can say it's just doing its own thing all you want, but if it really wanted to do its own thing, then it wouldn't have blood in the title. Look, I don't want to end this retrospective on a downer. I'm glad I stumbled across this franchise. It's one that I knew of for a while now, but I never saw anyone talking about it, except for the occasional clip of carnage from Blood C. And I think that's a real shame. This franchise deserves to be talked about more. I mean, why do you think I did this whole song and dance? I like Blood. I mean, maybe not every last piece of it, but even now, I still kind of wish there was more. Maybe a new series that takes the gritty realism and overall vibe of The Last Vampire and adds some of that internal character conflict from Blood Plus. I guess there are a few blood-related things that I haven't watched, read, or played, and I could always come back to them, so maybe I'll keep that in mind going forward. Also, to be clear, you don't have to agree with anything I said in this video. I mean, maybe you love Blood C and you think Blood Plus is whack. That's fine. I mean, you're coping, but that's fine. Is anyone even gonna hear this part? I don't know if any of you have stuck around this long. If you have, I think you're super cool. This has been a very time-consuming video to make, but you know what? I'd do it all again if it's what you guys want. Or I could just go back to making things shorter. It doesn't really matter to me. Anyways, until next time, Ave Maria, Deus Vult, and actually the truth is, I think Blood sucks.